forward to it. What we're going to do now at 9:30 is open up the webinar. My colleague Douglas has already spotlighted the little card you see here. Of course, you can switch the view. For those of you joining us on Zoom, you can go back to gallery view if you like. That's just for any audience members that might come in at 9:30. That's the first thing they see. And then I'll say the briefest of brief intros and pass it over to Geneviève to get you going. And if there are audience members who have questions who join us today, I'll also jump back in towards the end and help out bringing those questions to you. But hopefully people will speak rather than kind of use the text box, but either way is fine. I'm ready, so we're gonna get going. All right. So good morning, everybody, and welcome to Untangling the Blurry Lines of Engaged Research. We are coming to you live from Concordia University's fourth space located in downtown Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, on unceded Indigenous land, where we facilitate daily activities that allow for knowledge sharing by focusing on what Concordia community members are working on in terms of research, various initiatives, and course activities. This week, we are delighted to work with Geneviève Grégoire-Labrecque, who is a PhD candidate in the individualized program here at Concordia and is also a Concordia University Public Scholar. It's been a pleasure to work with Geneviève to develop the ideas for this event, which are stemming from her research. She is joined today by three scholars, one of whom has also joined us in the space, along with Geneviève, Vivek, Venkatesh, and Jennifer, Danquah, and Kathleen Manion are joining us via Zoom. So welcome to all. I'll just quickly say that this is a webinar, but we do encourage you to jump into the conversation towards the end. And you can do that simply by raising your virtual hand, and we'll sweep in and unmute you so that you can speak. Otherwise, if you are more of a texter, the Q&A and the chat are activated. If you have questions or comments, you can pop them in there and I'll relay them to everybody in the Zoom here. And I'll just finally mention that we are live streaming and recording this event, so I'll pop the link in the chat for those of you who are joining us via Zoom and listening on YouTube. You can feel free to ask questions there, make comments, and again, I'll happily read them out to the folks here. All right, on that note, it's my pleasure to pass it over to you, Geneviève. Good morning.
Good morning, Anna. Thank you for inviting me here this week to do this event. So you have introduced me briefly, but I would like to also introduce briefly the guest that I'm here with. So as you mentioned, Vivek Venkatesh is here with me. He's a prof at Concordia University at the Department of Arts Education. I'm also joined by Kathleen Manion, Associate Professor at the School of Humanitarian Studies at Royal Roads in BC. So early morning for Kathleen. And Jennifer Danquah, PhD candidate at Würzburg University in Germany. So welcome all. I don't know if you can wave for our guests that are live with us. Briefly, before we start, discussing, I wanted to introduce why did I chose this topic to discuss with you. So in the last year, I have realized how engaged in the community I was through my research and other commitments I had like on my schedule, and I realized how I had deep ties with the community, but also was aiming at making some changes. And that type of research was actually creating some reflection, and I was wondering about my ethical stance, my boundaries. And I thought I need to untangle all the blurriness of that type of research I am doing. And I called it engaged research. So I would like to start with the question, what does it mean for you to be an engaged scholar or to do engaged research? Is that even a term that you're comfortable using? What does that mean for you? So anyone who wants to jump in can start there.
Maybe I'll kick things off. Yeah, is that okay? Yeah. But merci beaucoup, Geneviève, pour cette invitation. Well, I think in order to answer the question, I'm going to have to perhaps focus the specific issue or issues or even concepts that I engage with, to use the word engage. The first part of my answer is going to be, I never really thought of myself as an engaged scholar. So I was curious as to why I was asked to be part of this event. So in our initial conversations, you explained how your conceptualization of the term engaged perhaps converged with some of the actions that I've taken. So it made it easier for me to see, okay, here's where I'd like to bring forward the conversation. I study broadly how we can prevent violence. And I do this through a combination of collaborations in psychiatry, in psychology, in arts-based pedagogies. I look carefully at ways in which we can value and amplify the narratives of marginalized communities. And I think the notion of engaged has to be grounded in the ways in which we treat ourselves. And by that, I mean as scholars in an immense position of privilege, especially here in Canada, where we benefit from large swaths of public funding. And to what extent we learn from, learn with, and co-construct ways in which we can share the narrative space with our partners. So I think the piece that draws me to the term engaged is trying to find a way to break down certain hegemonic, certain cultural, certain social, very, very importantly, political, and then economic practices that have tainted the ways in which I have been trained as a researcher and which I'm trying to shed now in, I think, a very new, exciting, and a very scary role as an engaged researcher. So maybe I'll stop there to see how you and our colleagues, and it's nice to meet you both, Jennifer, Kathleen.
Thank you, Vivek. I think you have coined very interesting words, and I wonder what Jennifer and Kathleen think about that.
Jennifer, I was waiting for you to go, but I will go if you don't mind. I think it's such an interesting question, Geneviève. I really appreciate it. And Vivek, you made such a compelling argument, so thank you for that. I too came to the invitation curious because it's not a term that I have used in the past, but to really sat with it for a little while to think about it. I think it's a great term, and I appreciate that you've brought it to the fore because it is true. The reason I come to academia is because of research. I'm interested in research, but particularly research that makes a difference. I'm not all that interested in filing paperwork that sits on a shelf, but rather having some kind of engaged research, as it were, that works with communities, with individuals, and is working towards some kind of positive change in the spaces where we work together. So I think it is a really useful way of framing the work we do, and I really love that you framed it in looking at the blurry lines as well, because there are so many, because it is the value of it is not just for me as a scholar or an academic or a researcher, but for the people that I'm working with. So it means that you're more invested, and you have to be more invested, and the accountability is that much higher, which comes with its cost, right? It comes with that difficulty of saying no, of not being on all the time, as your opening poster shows us. So it's an interesting term, and I think one that I will continue to use, and we'll probably get into it a little bit more, but I happen to work at a university that privileges that kind of scholarship, that is community-based, that is looking to make changes with communities, and that's not always the case. So again, that's a privilege in terms of where I'm situated, that I have an institution behind me that supports that kind of work. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Kathleen. So from what I've heard from Vivek's side and Kathleen. So I hear that engaged research entails making changes with the community, but also the way we are doing it. So the process and the impact, and there's like privileges and boundaries as well. So Jenny, I don't know, what are your thoughts on that? What does it mean for you doing engaged research, or if that's something that you use as a term? Or
Yes, also thank you for the invite, and I'm happy to meet you, Vivek and Kathleen. For me, it was the same. I was talking to Geneviève, and I was thinking about, okay, how can I contribute? What do you mean by engaged? I already have the feeling as I'm defining myself as a Black woman, for example. So I'm already engaging in somehow, or interrupting somehow ways of thinking that are attached to, for example, that in Germany it's not so common that Black women do academia, for example. So even with this kind of things, I'm already engaging in somehow, I think. But this is also linked to the topic that I'm working on, and it's on adult education and racism, and how you can diminish or work against racism in adult education. So what I'm trying to do is sensibilize the society about the racism topic in Germany. So that's how I engage. That's I'm in companies, I'm in different social organizations, I'm on panels, I give interviews, and I think that's the way that I do engaged research, because I'm communicating what I'm researching on, and yes, contributing to getting the society a bit more justice. I don't know. So yes, that's the ways I would say that I'm engaging.
thank you, Jennifer. So again, I hear so many ways of being engaged. So through topics that we chose to work on, through the ways we do research, the unlearning we do as researchers. I think, Vivek, you mentioned like the way you were taught as a scholar, and now you want to break down these I don't know, worlds, or the way we have been taught to do some things to actually bring more social justice in the process. And then there's like the impact that we're trying to make, like Kathleen said, and Jennifer as well, like the changes, the positive changes for social justice. So there's all these blurry lines and the broad range as well of doing engaged research. And I have found that also in my work, in the way I engaged with children or young people, and the way I also after report back, and yeah, this tension between engaging with the community and bring it back to academia, and this tension of, do I fight against academia or the institution, or should I work together? So there are different tension, I believe, and also, yeah, these blurry lines, how do we entangle them to have quality research, but also make a difference? How do we try to untangle these knots in engaged research? The big question here.
Maybe I can take a stab at this, Geneviève, with your permission. Kathleen, Jennifer, thanks. So there's, I guess, two broad axes that I can address, but I think the one that tempts me the most after having heard you frame the issue would be, how do you position yourself? How do I position myself? Let's make this personal. How do I position myself as an engaged researcher within academia? The second piece would be, what are the practices that I've engaged in with communities? What have I learned with communities? What have they constructed with our teams to move forward? But within academia, I think I perceive the most tensions. And part of this, I guess, is related very closely to a fraud syndrome that I suffer from with regards to the work I'm conducting. I'm not trained to work in prevention of violence or prevention of discrimination. And by training, I mean, you know, the higher education graduate studies that I undertook were firmly grounded in mathematics. So I worked in educational psychology, educational technology, but I focused specifically on building statistical models. And, you know, I think it was all right. It wasn't earth-shattering in terms of the work that was produced. It obviously contributed something new to knowledge, which is the, I guess, line that you need to cross in order to obtain a doctorate in the field. But I did feel a certain sense of emptiness in terms of the work I was pursuing from a personal standpoint. I didn't feel that I was benefiting from the work. And I also felt that I was missing a certain humanist orientation. So coming to terms with that, but also coming to terms with the deep impact on my mental health that I had suffered as a result of a loss when I was very young. I lost a family member to a terrorist attack, and learning to process that, and then thinking through, okay, I'm in a position where I can actually make a difference. It's not that the work I'm doing now and that I'm trained to do isn't making that difference, but it doesn't appeal to me. And if I can't see myself doing this work and take pleasure from it to a modest extent, and I'm not saying that my work should define my life, and I try for that to not happen, then I really don't want to pursue the field of academia. So the question of engagement in academia is very, very closely tied to my motivation to work within that particular field. But herein comes that tension, because there are gatekeepers. There are gatekeepers within paradigmatic conventions. And even if paradigms of research, of methodologies, of theory building, even if those are progressing, changing, regressing sometimes, I'm still up against a whole slew of people who have rightfully worked very, very hard in this particular field, who have developed and have built on the canon, right, the canonical work in the field. And I'm sort of I'm working myself in as a peripheral participant, to use a management-related term, right? And whether I'm legitimate or not is completely up to whether I have lived up to the expectations of the academia. Have I published in a specific journal? Have I successfully received grant monies from the specific fields? Is my work peer-reviewed? And I think that's where part of my engagement still remains in flux, because I have chosen, and with the immense privilege I have of being a full professor and having a research chair and directing a research center here at Concordia, I've chosen to say, you know what, fuck that. I'm going to think really more carefully about who is it that I want to work with, who is it that I want to learn with, and in what ways can I transfer this engagement to the groups of people whom I can create a legacy with, right? So this is a specific decision I've made, and the engagement then is grounded purely in the interactions, the collaborations, the successes, and the failures, not to keep them as binary, but that whole spectrum of work with the communities. So my master is the community. My masters are the communities who we serve, who we learn from. And I guess rhetorically, I come back and I guess I raise my hand when necessary and speak about the work that we're doing. Fortunate enough to be able to fund our work through non-traditional means, whether it comes through foundations, through the departments in the Canadian government that are specifically focused on anti-racism, specifically focused on counterterrorism, specifically focused on community resilience. These are the partners with whom we build our relationships with. So I think that I think frames this edginess that I feel and the tension that I feel, which I'm comfortable with. but yeah, it does take a risk.
Thank you, Vivek. So I hear this risk, this tension, but this personal choice to situate oneself and to make allies. So the master is the community, as you mentioned. So I don't know if that resonates with you, Jennifer, or Kathleen, in your work, this tension, and have you chosen a side or chosen a posture that you're comfortable with to move forward in your research, but also in your daily life as a, you know, an individual part of a community. So how does that fit in your life?
Maybe another point first, more related to the beginning of what Vivek said, that a personal motivation or incident may choose oneself to engage in research and then also with society and the community. And I think there's also this tension or a problem, because from people that I know that are engaged, if you use now the term of engaging, engaged scholar, there's a personal motivation. Also for me, I want that the society changes. So it's my personal approach to lead to change what I'm doing. And I think that more, or to get together academia and engaged scholars, maybe those to get those both together is more that we acknowledge in academia more the engagement with the community and with the society, and to say, yes, there has to be a bigger meaning than just peer reviewing articles, but what is the bigger aim of your research, and what do you want to change with what you are doing? So I think, or I feel that this is getting, or is not there, and you have always to, or in my case, I always have to justify why I'm engaging so much and why I'm not focusing on my research. And or for me, it's I'm focusing on my research because this is like helping me to reflect on my research and what I'm writing on, and then later on also the articles. But what I see is always, okay, stop or do less, just focus on your articles and your PhD studies. So you engage, you take all of your energy all the time, and then you also face in academia those boundaries or walls that say what you're doing is fine, but just finish your PhD and then you can do even more. And yes, I know that, but now is also the time for a change. And yes, that's what I wanted also to add, that there's a this personal motivation should be maybe more be acknowledged by supervisors and in academia, and also there should be maybe more funds or positions, communicators, maybe community communicators or activators, or I don't know, which are specifically working also between academia and community and society. So yes, these are my thoughts on it.
Thank you, Jennifer. What you said is so connected with what I just said before we started this discussion. Vivek has asked me, "Oh, what are you doing this week for your residency as a public scholar?" And I said, "Well, you know, I have to focus on my PhD. I've done so many things outside academia that now I have to focus on it and move forward." So it actually it resonates with me that the other extracurriculars, if we can say that, are not necessarily considered part of the research trajectory. And on that note, Kathleen and I have worked together in the last year on this huge initiative to amplify youth voices for a better future around environment and climate change. And this was, you know, just slightly on the border of research, but not really research, but he really maybe volunteering. And so I will pass the talking stick to Kathleen and see what she thinks about this tension and the personal motivation to move forward and how it connects with academia.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. It's so interesting to see these different concepts woven together, but particularly in terms of the trajectory, the academic trajectory of the people here. Some two of you working on your PhD through to somebody with the full professorship, and just thinking about the different periods of time in academia, right? In your ability to say yes to the things that really motivate you. I think that's also important given the institution that you're up against that's either supporting or not supporting you in that work, which is actually probably doing both, probably saying both, yes, please do that, that's really important, and yet also make sure you're also publishing. So I think that that's really interesting and also resonates for me. But coming back to something that you said, Vivek, I think is really important or really pulled on me, that the idea that making it personal was important, that you do this work because they have some tie to an experience you had earlier in life, but also because it continues to interest you or draw you in. I think that there's that also speaks to me, and I think it's important that we are doing something that we are passionate about, because we're more likely to bring our best selves to that space when we have a clear purpose in what we're doing, even if it's a blurry purpose, but a clear motivation to work with community to make that social change or economic or political or legal change that we're working with community to do. And that edginess it's interesting that you're on the peripheral of the academic world. For me, my background is in social work, so I came from being in the community, working with participants, working with individuals within the community, working in policy making. And then I came to academia. So I came a different route than what would normally be expected. And I came to academia because I saw that there was a real space that is on the edge of traditional research and more artistic based, participatory, more action-based research where you could make a difference. And thinking about the skills that I have made more sense for me to be able to support in that space, in that edginess of research. And that's what drew me to academia. So I also see a lot of the barriers that exist within particularly traditional institutions. I found one that I work for, as I said, who supports this kind of work of research that is less research-like and more community activism-like. And that's been fantastic, but I still come up against those barriers every now and then. But again, it comes back to that personal motivation of why am I doing this? What is giving me joy? And it is working with the community. So I probably do work more than I should, probably more than is healthy. And I think we'll probably get to that conversation. But the work I need to do for the university sits over here. I can just do that. But it's all the other stuff that's important that I think is hopefully making a difference. It gets done off the side of my desk, and I'm okay with that because that is what drives me to do what I do. And that was a rambly answer. So I'll turn it back to you, Geneviève.
Thank you, Kathleen. And I think you have touched something here. Oh, I have my morning brain is just foggy right now. But it's the personal boundaries. You have said I maybe work too much, and also I hear that in what Jennifer said, that she has been engaging a lot in communication and interviews, and also Vivek, from our previous conversation, I heard your master is the community. So I hear you are there a lot as well. And in one sense, we have discussed the way we maybe can make some boundaries with academia and choosing how we will do the research and how we will report back, or what we accept and what we fight a little. But then how do we put personal boundaries in the kind of work that we do if we engage with real people in the community and that are maybe suffering from violence, or marginalized communities, or young people that have, you know, a voice, but that is not heard depending on who they are and their positionality. So how do we say, okay, I have to take some time for myself now, but you know, these personal boundaries, maybe it's self-care. You know, we have talked a lot about this in the previous year in academia and also in community organization, but I feel this tension also very present in the way I will speak also for in the way I do engaged research. And so yes, there is academia, but there's also the community that I have deep relationship and trusting relationship with young people. And how do I say, okay, I need this time off to think? And so how do you deal with that in your respective field? And yes, I will leave it there.
Maybe at the beginning, sorry, maybe I at just start. I think it's mainly also the to allow yourself that you have the possibility to take a break. So it's not like, okay, now I have to take a break, but understanding that it's important to reset and refresh yourself, and not to get frustrated, because I have the feeling that the more that I take on office, and I'm going out and I'm talking and talking and talking, my motivation goes down, and then I have the feeling I get often more frustrated, and then the people can feel it as well. So it doesn't help anymore. So, and when I'm at this edge, I know, okay, I have to step back, and it's also fine to step back to get back the strength, and then you can go out again. And but I think we also, or what we've talked also in advance, that can we leave also engaged fieldwork, for example? And I think this kind of question also fits with what I wanted to say, because I think I don't want to not be engaged. I don't want to leave engaged fieldwork, but I just have to see how can I put or how can I listen more to my body and what my body needs, and not only be that ambitious and forget all about my physical well-being, just say it like this, but also the mental one. Yeah.
Thank you, Jennifer. I don't know if that resonates with Kathleen and Vivek.
Maybe I can just add to what Jennifer was saying. One of the things that I take a lot of solace in is that I continuously evaluate and reevaluate where my loyalties lie. So when it comes to the institution, I'm really grateful to be working at an institution like Concordia, where the boundaries of engagement as an academic are constantly being pushed by researchers themselves. So I can bring my work to a larger table, to a conversation, and present it and receive feedback, and work through how that output, the outcomes of my work, fit into a larger ecosystem, research, administration, teaching, or otherwise at Concordia. But I know precisely where my loyalties lie at the university, and it's with those structures that support the work that I'm engaged in. And I need to focus my attention on that loyalty. I cannot function if I have to spread myself thin. So, you know, when I refuse to participate in a particular committee, when I say no, thank you, it's not going to work out for me this time around, it's precisely because my loyalties lie elsewhere. So it's a political decision that one makes. It's very important, I think, to recognize that the work that we're committed to, at least that I'm committed to as an engaged scholar, does suck me dry, right? It sucks me dry from a cognitive standpoint, from a physical standpoint, and from a mental standpoint. So where do those loyalties lie within the institution? That's something I constantly evaluate and reevaluate. Where do the loyalties lie within the communities, and how does that interface with what I'm doing? I think I've also realized, thanks to some very important advice that I've received from our longtime program manager, Catherine Urbaniak, is that, you know, the privilege that comes with working in a field that I direct, that I'm pushing forward in my own ways, also comes with the fact that as a person of color, as a person belonging to a minority community, I'm attracting and working with a host of visible minority communities, groups that are engaged in fighting discrimination, and therefore by definition are minorities within the Canadian landscape. So my responsibilities go beyond just understanding where my personal or professional loyalties lie. How can I best support these groups? And I may not want to publish, and I may want to pursue my artistic outputs, which I have the privilege of doing through film and music and performances, but my students still have to write dissertations. So when I throw up my hands and say, this isn't a research project, I'm not going to work on ethics for this, I'm going to disadvantage a whole host of scholars in training who require some form of support in order to build their own doctoral work, right? And they're working within a specific canon, right? So I think surrounding yourself with people who can push back against any selfishness, because I will act selfishly, and that is human. If you can push back against that selfishness and say, if you can't do it, can you maybe hire someone to help you manage this so that you aren't disadvantaging those whom you should be protecting? Whether you do it consciously or unconsciously is besides the matter. And that responsibility is tough. It's tough to acknowledge. I know that I have had to seek assistance from therapists with regards to the anxiety and panic that I face, which are triggered by seemingly very, very banal things, right? But this is really important, I think, to ensure that you're surrounded by voices that don't necessarily agree with how you function. It's helped me immensely, and I'm not saying that this is something that applies across, but in this era of extreme polarization, even within academia, you have to be able to listen to people who tell you, yeah, there's another side to this. There's several more sides to this. What you're not seeing is how your engagement, your political activism within the institution is harming people around you.
Thank you. This is very interesting. On one side, Jennifer has brought forward the necessity to take care of oneself, to continue to be engaged. And on the other side, well, I don't think they're opposite, but I'm just for the sake of this conversation. But Vivek, you have brought forward the need to, yes, take care of yourself, but also see the multiplicity of perspective in order to continue engagement, even through maybe rest. So seeing that you have, from what I understood, a responsibility through your research, through maybe for your doctoral students or the community, and in pulling away, maybe you let other marginalized communities, I don't like the word down, but this could be a perception that we have. So how do we take care of ourselves to continue to be engaged, but also not let the whole work crumble? So that's what I understood. And I don't know if Kathleen or Jennifer, you would like to respond to that, if that speaks to you, or if you have solutions or hints of what we can do if we are faced, with our personal limitations, or also the limitation of the work that we lead, that it imposes on us. So I don't know if you want to take the floor.
I can jump in. Again, thank you. It's so interesting to hear both of all three of your perspectives. This is a tricky question for me. It's the one that I feel most uncomfortable answering, because no, I don't have an answer. I don't have a set of tips to support people going forward. But I love to hear your perspectives, and I fully support what you're saying, Jennifer, about self-care, of the analogy of using the life mask on the airplane, right? Of making sure you first give that to yourself in order to be able to support others around you. That's really important. And this is what I tell my students. I really do push the idea of self-care, of making sure that you are building in time, you're building in breaks, because you can't continue to do the good work that you're doing unless you are building in that self-care routine. And academia is a place that will take advantage, either explicitly or implicitly. So it is critical, and yet I don't do it well. I do spread myself too thin. So I liked that analogy also, Vivek, of knowing where your loyalties lie. That is a really good tip, I think, in making sure that you are supporting the most important areas where you can put your energy. I think that is a wise practice. But also in the chat function, I see that Tiffany has thanked Vivek for bringing up mental health in academia. And again, I think we do need to, as academics, support the notion that the work we do is hard, the way we do it is hard, and it has an impact on people. So I think we could more collectively work to support ourselves as well. So the work that everyone in this room is doing in terms of social justice, we could turn that lens internally to look at our colleagues who are struggling. So thanks.
Thank you, Kathleen. So yes, maybe it's a good moment after this 19 months of pandemic to amplify the need for mental health resources for yes, scholars, also community members, students. So I wanted to mention it clearly here for better quality research, I believe, and research of quality, but also for continue moving forward towards more social justice in the world. And a segue to that would be, Jennifer, you have brought it, you have touched it, is like, at some point, if we're talking about academia and funding and the research project in its very, square box here will end. We have no more funding. We have collected data. The whole formal thing will come to an end. Is that a thing? Can we pull out from a field work in the strict sense of the academia term, or do we will always continue? We have built these relationships, and I would like to discuss that briefly, because for me right now I'm at this point where I have been in schools, in few schools, high schools for a year now, and I have stayed a little longer to make sure that I have built a trusting relationship, that I just don't come in and take everything and so they have a smooth transition. But is that such a thing as moving out from the field? What do you think? Kathleen?
Can I add something to what Vivek said earlier from the selfishness part? I just wanted to emphasize that I think people who are doing this engaged research or scholar thing, they are more like altruistic, I have the feeling. So we live for a cause, and then we try to give everything in, or I just speak for myself. I don't know if it resonates with you, but you put all of your effort in, and you give and you give, and there are people, even if they are in the same area of your work, who will take your office and make your office, and they know also that maybe you can't refuse, because you're dedicated to what you want to do and to the change that you want to lead to. And I think that it is very important to then set the boundaries and get back to the selfishness, or at least say to yourself, it's not negative or bad if you say, no, it's too much. It's too much. And I will be at some point now a bit selfish, because if I'm not, I won't be able at all to contribute to society, because I have breakdowns and I'm not able to change anything. So I just wanted to emphasize that selfishness must not be something bad, and I just wanted to underline that.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Can I just pop in
Yes,
too? Because that term also interested me, the kind of a continuum between selfless and selfish. I think it's interesting in where we kind of situate ourselves, and maybe we feel a little selfish to take time for ourselves, but so important to, if you have any idea of being selfless, to maybe get rid of the barriers between those two juxtaposed concepts. But coming back to your question, Geneviève, about can you leave engaged scholarship or engaged research? I think it's interesting in looking back over a career to see those projects that have continued and those that haven't. I think you do have to take your cues really also from your community. I've been in some where the energy has just been palpable. It's been so amazing to a culmination of whatever the culmination is, and then it just completely dissipates. And those projects you think that are going to continue on, you think you're going to continue to work with the community, and there just isn't the energy after whatever that end event was. So you do have to take your cues, right? And some communities will want you to continue, and you might have to morph your research into something else where you're continuing. It's rare that we know everything we need to know from a particular project, right? So looking at the ways you can rebuild and sculpt a new project with those communities can be really amazing. And sometimes you want to do that, and again, the energy just isn't there. So that's been my experience. Particularly, I have taken a week or so to really sit and reflect on, given an institutional process, the work that I have done over a few decades. My work is about systems that support children to thrive. That's all of my research focuses on that, and having a look backwards has been interesting to see those projects that morph into new projects at those communities you continue to work with, and those that, you know, they just pause for a while. And just got an email yesterday from someone I haven't heard from in 4 or 5 years asking to come back together. So again, it's about paying attention to, I guess, your own sense of what's important now, but also what are your communities asking for and needing.
Thank you, Kathleen. Vivek, do you want to react?
Well, I guess, sure. I certainly feel that I purposefully design the work I'm engaged in with community participants so that the main actors, the groups that conduct the activities, that lead the activities, are from the communities themselves. In fact, I'm just recalling a research question I framed last month for a grant application, which sort of grew organically from the description of the project, was what are the affordances and challenges in sustainably empowering marginalized youth to autonomously run whatever these workshops were, right? They're arts-based, they're community resilience, they're mental health oriented. So that's part of the question. And I'm asking for money to work for 5 years because I want to see across 5 years, would it be possible for the researchers, so to speak, to step away? And under what conditions is that possible? So I build this into my programs because I absolutely do not want to have any part of this, right? And I say this in a very, very selfish way. I have my artistic pursuits, which influence the way I work with communities. but I have those artistic pursuits. I continue to make my demos and play with my band and perform. I continue to make films and see that they get distributed or that we put them up on YouTube. So I separate that work, and it's very important for me to not have any sense of possession over these projects. Right? So I feel very little possession over these projects. I can perhaps describe what my vision for them is, but once it's out there and community members are entangled in it and they start pulling it apart and they say, we like this, we don't like this, that's when I love just stepping away. So yeah, it's very important for me, very important from the get-go.
The project have a life of their own once they're
Yeah,
almost like a child, they're born.
You know, I think is, before we began this conversation today, the other part as well that's important is that I really do not, and I strive to do this in the way I think of these issues. I don't like for my identity, my individuality, and my motivations to be conflated with those of the project. And it happens, it's going to happen. People are going to say, this is what inspired Vivek and his team to do this, or this is what inspired Owen to do this, and this is what inspired Catherine to do this. It's not, maybe that's one way to start the conversation, but I think it's much more about the phenomenon and not the people who are speaking about and or reifying the phenomenon. And so I like to make that distinction, and that flies in the face, I think, of a lot of how we even present our research, right? I've been advocating for long that academic grants need to be double-blind reviewed. They're not right now.
Okay.
There's 60% of your grant that goes towards your CV.
You're right.
You know, I'm a long-time advocate of that. So what does this project have to offer? Let's review that, and then let's look at how awesome or not the researchers are. But we don't do that. They're completely conflated.
Yeah, so there's the project in itself is separated from the researcher, but oh yeah, sorry.
But it's so difficult, right? I mean, you have to quote people who speak about the issues who've developed it. Otherwise, you're accused of taking away the ideas.
Yeah.
Right. And then, you know, I've chaired national research grant committees where people are like, well, why wasn't I in the reference list? I've done work in this area. They missed this. Yeah, that's, you know, that's kind of soul destroying.
This is the way academia is built. We're coming back to
some
this,
parts,
some parts,
not all, some
not
parts of it.
all.
Yeah.
And then there is the relationships, so the partnerships as a human who is in the field. So there's the researcher and the project, and there's the human side of it that sometimes maybe community organization will call you back, hey Vivek, or hey Jennifer, Kathleen, Geneviève, would you be interested in moving forward with us on that? And then there's like always tension and all these side of like facets of our project. And I would like to bring something we have had in the side discussion, if you're okay with this, Vivek. We in Canada, but I guess also maybe in Germany or elsewhere in the world, we live in very diverse world, and in this conversation we have highlighted the different tensions and sides of doing engaged research. But then one of my questions I had in mind was like, how do we reconcile all of that? And a side conversation, Vivek told me something like, maybe we do not have to reconcile it. We can move forward and you know, acknowledging differences, trying to move towards a consensus. Maybe, let me know if I'm using the right words here, but then maybe we just have to acknowledge that there will always be this tension. And then I don't know if Vivek, you want to react, and then I can pass the baton to Kathleen and Jennifer. But
yeah,
do you still feel like that after our discussion?
I do feel that way, Geneviève. Thank you for bringing it up. In fact, speaking of people who are largely inspiring, Chantal Mouffe, who is a Belgian political theorist, I believe she works in the United Kingdom now, has written some, I think, some very, very important theoretical pieces around how conflict is essential in liberal democracies. And I find that if we can adapt some of her suggestions around pluralism, now my own project, Project Someone, which stands for Social Media Education Every Day, is grounded in pluralism. And it's grounded not just in pluralism as enabling diverse perspectives to coexist, but actually enacting those practically. What does that mean in a classroom? What does that mean on the public stage? What does that mean for an artistic performance? What you're alluding to, Geneviève, here is, I think, a very important notion that we strive to build consensus too quickly. And if we follow perhaps an agonistic way of understanding pluralism, where you're not arguing with someone in order to declare victory, you're allowing the time and space for reflection, you're allowing the time and space to listen to facts, information, opinions, and we need to think about what the definitions of those terms are, but you're allowing for the conflict to remain as essential to the building of a democratic discussion. But the moment you say, I'm going to declare victory, then you're sort of falling into the trap of antagonism, right? And we see that so often. And I think in accelerationist models, in social media, we tend to react very quickly and react within what, 200 odd characters, whatever it is, right? So there's very little space to build an argument. And I'm not saying that building an argument requires an academic to derive a thesis. I think you can ask for some time and space to reflect. So how do you work from antagonism to perhaps more agonistic ways? Agonism representing the need to appreciate the conflict. But then when you don't take, I don't think you should also deny that emotions are so important. I think one of the failings in thinking through, especially conflations of critical theory and postmodernism, is that human emotions don't necessarily play a role, but human emotions do play a role. So how do you treat a person across the table not as an enemy, but as a respected adversary? So these are words that MOOF has put together in some seminal pieces. And the last one that I read this weekend was in 2000, which asked the question, deliberative democracy or agonistic pluralism? And I think that's where we need to move forward. So looking at Chantal Mouffe's work, looking at people like Sarah Madison from Australia, I believe, another political theorist, they have actually risen to the occasion and developed, I think, extremely favorable reactions to thinking alongside people who view a problem very differently from us. How do you think alongside them? Like, how do you not other without othering? Like, that's really crucial for me.
In your work, but also I think we can take everything that you've said and apply it or transfer it, or using what you said for the discussion and how we deal with all these blurry lines as an engaged scholar. And I wonder what Jennifer or Kathleen think, if you agree, disagree, or not even position yourself as you said. Can we reflect on this?
I think what Vivek said is very important, that but I just wanted to add that we need also be conscious about that we have to create or make spaces to even can discuss those things. So to have a conflict, we have to have room for conflict, and we have to see that there's maybe something in opposite going on right now, and then we have to discuss it. And maybe I have also the feeling in my case that it's not really seen, this engagement. It's just somebody is doing it aside, and wow, okay, it's some people judge what I'm doing or not, but it's just there, and they maybe say, yes, okay, wow, but it costs a lot of energy, but there's not a discussion on going on whether whether academia should be more engaged, or how can we profit from these different, or from engaged scholarship and academia. So I think there has to be this room of reflection, and so the conflict is important, but in order to start a conflict, you have to have spaces to do the conflict. I think, I don't know if you understand what I want to say, but yeah, that's maybe a point that I wanted to add.
Thank you, Jenny. So yes, even having space to actually live the conflict, recognize that it's a conflict, can also be important. I think that the time we're taking this morning or this afternoon, depending on where we are in the world right now, could be, you know, a time to reflect on that conflict and that positionality as an engaged researcher in the community, in academia, and in our own personal life. And Kathleen, I don't know if you wanted to react to Jennifer and Vivek comments.
Sure, thank you. I'm trying, and someone just very kindly brought me a cup of coffee, so maybe I can do it now, trying to weave together a couple of different ideas. If I can go back actually just to your original question, Geneviève, you asked us to look at the blurry lines and what do we do with the blurry lines, right? How do we reconcile? I would say I actually quite like the blurry lines. That's where I thrive, is in those spaces on that edge. Go back to Vivek's term, edginess. I love that space because that's where you can, and maybe this is where you weave in the concept of conflict. That's where you have some space to have dialogue, to talk about, well, maybe we can do it this way. Maybe there's some space to shift some things. And that's what I quite like. Other conversations we've had, Geneviève, about ethics, working with research ethics boards in the blurry lines. That's where I love to work, to find some ways that you can really honor ethical processes with all of the parties, right? So I quite enjoy blurry lines, but I think actually that's also maybe a space, going back to Jennifer's point, where you can have this constructive conflict, where you can bring dialogue to the fore. And I would agree with Vivek that this is one of the things that scares me the most about where we're going collectively as a society, is our inability to really engage with difference, to really take a different idea and be okay with that and not have that disrupt our sense of self. Which brings me back to another point that I wanted to make, that Vivek raised about living in academia. One of the things that the system does to us within academia, the normative principles within academia, is that it forces us to bring our egos to the fore, right? To say, hey, this is my great work, and to maybe sit on a committee and say, hey, how come you didn't put my reference on that list because I've done some work? That is what the system supports us to do, right? Is to bring our ego to the fore, which raises anxiety levels, right? Which touches back on that concept of mental health, that the system itself produces these normative controls on us. But again, there's maybe some comfort. I'm trying to weave together some very disparate ideas, but the comfort sitting in that blurry space, right? Of I don't have to play the ego game, which maybe relieves me of some of the anxiety, because I can play in that space and have those discourses around difference, new ideas, challenging status quo. And I will wrap up that fuzzy dialogue right now.
Maybe just to add one thing. Thank you for your input. I think also that in this blurriness, it's also in those in-betweens that something is going on. And I think maybe this is what you wanted to describe, that you can think in other ways, you can I don't know, take another path, and it's in this in between, and you don't have to position yourself whether there or there, but it's just this blurriness and this in between where something is really going on in this space. And to this ego trip, I don't know how to call it, but I don't know, I would also put another or shed another perspective on it, because for me, for example, I mainly attach the topic to my personality. So if someone is thinking about we want to in our organization, we want to do something about racism, yes, there's Jennifer Danquah who is saying something to this topic. So I think it's not just something bad that you create your topic around your personality, because it's not like my personality, and I don't want to say, okay, this Jennifer is so great, so we invite her, but it's the topic that is interested, and unfortunately I'm speaking, so I mean, this is attached to me in some ways. And if, for example, I change my workspace, the topic goes with me because the workspace is not into this kind of topic. So it goes with me, and then people with different topics can also exchange. And I think that this should also be added. I know that it's different from academia and how many papers you wrote and so on for the blind review. I think it could be also something considered, but maybe just this perspective of outside or inside. So also in the blurry of academia, but doing communication. I think this is also important to shed light on.
Thank you, Jennifer. I don't know if Vivek, you want to comment on that, but I think we have gone through a journey here, and for me, it's actually very surprising, but also comforting to see that I feel like at home in these blurry lines. I from what you have said, it's like constructive. That's where there is space to change things, to reflect. I think I will see these blurry lines that the past year I have felt very uncomfortable, but now maybe I can actually embrace the discomfort and see how I can work with them, and actually seeing there are possibilities of playing, dancing with academia and institutions, but also with communities and the community members we work with. And even in my personal life, it means there's nothing fixed. We can play and move. I seriously, these last comments here I feel this surge of energy here, seeing that we can actually, there are no rules. We make our own rules, and we can play with them, and we can find our loyalty and our own way of making it, and our own personal boundaries in all this blurriness. So I don't know if you have one last thought or comment, and what you take from this discussion in moving forward. I don't know if something has hits you, or how do you take the day after this discussion we have had?
Well, for me, Geneviève, first off, thank you for hosting us in such a lead fashion. Really fantastic. You were able to navigate these multitudes of experiences and disciplines and our respective identities, right, as you're working through this. Really amazing to watch you juggle the topics as we're bringing them up and to refocus us. I just want to perhaps come to this notion of blurriness. Kathleen mentioned it a couple of times. Edginess as well, which I was brought up in our conversation as well. But the problem here, which is a fantastic problem to have, is as academics, we're going to want to define this blurriness. But the moment you do it, you are going to I guess, become a slave to that particular demon, because by definition, something that's blurry it's hazy, you can't really make out what it is. You know, if you take it to its limit, it's undefinable. So what we're trying to do is not define it, but the more we talk about it, we're going to be like, oh, here's what blurry means. These are the characteristics of something that's blurry. No, 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 no. Let's not do that. So I guess the only thing I'm taking away from this is that we need to hide the blurriness. We need to hide the essence, or I need to hide the essence of what ticks. I think it especially for me personally, but also broadly with the work I'm engaged in. And I do that by, I think, working with and inviting people who think differently from me. And I have a privilege in doing that. I have the funding to make that happen, but it is essential. It's absolutely essential. Like with Project Someone, we have 20 different initiatives which are led literally by different people coming from a variety of disciplines: criminology, philosophy, arts, critical thinking, and no one project converges with the other. So you're going to find people who completely disagree with each other. You have me on videos saying that hate is a beautiful emotion. Why are we suppressing it? And you've got others going, we need to eradicate it. But, you know, so for 7 years, that stuff has coexisted. And I want to see that happen more often. And so that's my vision here, is keep the blurriness as blurry as possible. Don't try and define it. That's my takeaway.
Thank you, Vivek. Jennifer, Kathleen, what are you taking away from this conversation we have had this morning or afternoon?
I'll jump in. Again, I also want to really thank you for bringing us together and for having the chance to spend some time with all three of you. Really interesting conversations. I've really enjoyed it. I think I've always loved the blurry lines, but I haven't necessarily given a space to think about that. So I think that is actually quite a helpful way to move forward. And Vivek bringing blurry lines into our interdisciplinary work, I think, is also really useful, of thinking about how do you honor those edges and support them, because it helps us with balance, right? We go back to that concept of finding the balance between selfless and selfish. I think similarly in the blurry lines, we find some balance somewhere between rigidity of institutions or disciplines, and fluidity, which maybe feels a little too uncomfortable and too unknown. So finding the balance, I think that's the other thing that I would take. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Kathleen. Jennifer, any final thoughts?
Yeah, thank you both of you for your final, or not even final, but maybe your thoughts to the comment of Geneviève. Also, thank you that I could be here, and it was very interesting. And I think I will take away or take with me, not take away, take with me the thought about generally engaged scholarship. I think, I mean, since Geneviève asked me to join the panel, or the discussion, I was thinking about it, and I was more and more reflecting on what I'm actually doing, and that it's somehow also engaged scholarship, because I wasn't sure how I can fit into this topic, but I think this I will take with me to reflect on what I'm doing currently on a meta level, maybe. And of course, as an educational scientist, this blurriness and in-between moments are very important in its ways. And so I would just also take these thoughts on blurry lines, and that we don't have to define this blurriness, otherwise it's visible again, and that's just the thing, or the important thing, that it's just not visible, so that we can do and evoke new things out of it. Yes, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you all. It was a pleasure to have you. I will let Anna tell us if there are comments or questions for us in the last minutes we have.
Thanks, Geneviève. I've been trying to encourage the audience to jump in, but I fear that post-long weekend, people need that extra coffee or a bit of caffeine. But for sure, I think everybody appreciated the fact that you've organized the session and actually given time to this sort of conversation, which is something that, of course, us here at Force-Space, we greatly encourage to kind of stop what you're doing and think about the process and the development of your research and your actions, and actually make that a kind of public conversation and moment. So I do see that somebody has just popped in a question asking for any advice or resources that you can share on how to write and publish engaged research through the blurriness without being extractive. So I'll let you consider that if you have any advice or resources, maybe think on it. And if we do have resources, we'll be able to follow up with the folks who registered by email to share any links. But advice, panelists?
Is it possible to repeat the question?
How to write and publish engaged research through the blurriness without being extractive?
Well, personally, I'd actually question this criteria of extractive. If that's something being imposed, whether within the discipline or by ethics, I think we need to be mindful of what that means. I think it necessarily asks us to question any kind of hegemony or hierarchy of knowledge that we may possess. In some of the work that I have been engaged in and that I have viewed, not read, but really viewed as an output. So whether it's documentaries or heard via podcasts or audio narratives, there are singular requests by communities for researchers, research creators like ourselves in my team, and community practitioners to carry the voices and amplify the voices of those who can't speak. Now, is that extractive? I'm not really sure. Does the extraction involve leveraging data once it's identified as data? That's important. When do you identify this as data? Does it involve leveraging the data for a personal and or professional end in terms of a publication? Is co-authorship with community participants something that you wish to achieve? Does it mean anything to the community participant for them to be a co-author on a paper? Like what capital does that bring them? Social, political, or economic? I think we need to query that, but I question the way we perceive extractive. Like when one of the shows that my band played was done just as Bill 21 here in Quebec. This is which is now a law, a discriminatory law that prevents certain religious minorities, specific religious minorities who wear religious garbs from being employed in government organizations. I remember speaking with a group of young Muslim youth, and we were playing a show based on media we collected with them, and it was important for us to represent that voice, but it was also important for me to carry that voice. So when we protested Bill 21 during the show, when we included media and reframed media that described that discrimination, I think it was extremely important for us to carry that. And we bore, as researchers and research creators, we bore that on us and shielded the community from having to bear it, because that's what we were asked to do. So I think it's, broadly, I think we need to be mindful of falling into the kinds of identity politics that we see a lot. But this is, again, my personal viewpoint on this.
Yeah, thank you, Vivek. And if I can add something from my very early career scholar, I always use transparency as my my ethics when I go in the field, when I write, or at least I try as much as I can to explain how I'm presenting the data, or what we and And same with the community. That's what I will do. How do you feel comfortable? Do you want to be involved? So, and then if that, just transparency for me would be, a way of trying to deal with these blurry lines when we write. I would also add what role we see ourselves doing or taking in when as an engaged scholar. Are we advocate speaking on behalf? Are we, listeners? Are we policymakers? I guess depending on the or communicator, as Jennifer has talked about. I think these different roles, and maybe I'm putting them in little boxes here, they can all be blurry, but I think that also helped in moving forward on how we carry on or transmit our message. So I don't know if Kathleen or Jennifer want to.
I think the great answers, great question. Thank you, Jamie. I think I would just also add that it's important to go back and say, what are you trying to publish? Like, why are you doing it? And this is maybe where you see that tension between what academia is asking you to do to further and advance your career and what you're doing with the community. But going back and saying, well, why are you publishing? Is it because you found some really important information and you want to share it because it's going to support a whole range of transformative initiatives? Well, then you will find the place where the most where more people are going to read it, right, or are going to hear it, or whatever. Or are you interested in sparking questions, right? If that's what you're trying to do, then traditional academic publishing is not where you want to do that. It is going to be somewhere in social media or through music or art or through some other avenue. So really going back to question, what is it you and your community are trying to do, and what is the best vehicle for doing that?
Thanks, Kathleen. Back to you, Anna. I don't know if there's other questions that have popped in or.
No, nothing's come in since. Maybe this is, we're getting some thank yous in the chat, so maybe this is a good moment to kind of sign off. Once again, I guess I'll just remind folks that we live streamed this event and recorded it, so it'll be available for your viewing pleasure later on, or you can share it with folks in across your channels. We really appreciate you coming together in this way. And Vivek and Geneviève, thank you so much for coming into the space, making the trek in here. We appreciate activating the actual space with folks in here. And of course, Kathleen and Jennifer, thanks so much for joining us across time zones. And to the audience, thanks for making it in. We appreciate you being here. Okay, folks, I think on that note, Geneviève, it's been a pleasure to work with you. We thank you very much. And we are going to close the webinar. So we wish you all a really great day. Thanks for being here. Take care.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.